If you want to influence a situation, if you want to speak with light, if you want to characterize your subject, if you want to tell the story of your subject, then bringing lighting along with you and being competent with it is absolutely part of the game. I always say, if you're on location and you don't have a light with you, that can work out just fine. Could be beautiful natural light. That's wonderful. When those days happen, I'm like, thank you, God. But at the same time, if you're pushed to the wall, the light's not good, then you become a victim of circumstances. Even with one flash in your hand, you can turn the situation around.
Hey, welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Raymond Hadfield, and each week I interview one of the world's most interesting photographers to learn what it really takes to capture beautiful images so that you can start to do the same. In today's Rewind episode, we're chatting with legendary photographer Joe McNally about the lessons that he's learned in his 40-plus years of shooting everything from covers for National Geographic and Time to shooting at the top of the Burj Khalifa and more. But first, the Beginner Photography Podcast is brought to you by CloudSpot. Simplify your business with studio management, organize clients, send professional contracts, automate invoice payments, and more. Keeping track of everything just got a whole lot easier. You can grab your free forever account over at deliverphotos.com and only upgrade when you and your business are ready. Now, Joe McNally is what they call a pro's pro. He is the real deal, which is also the name of his most recent book. And today he is sharing a few stories from the many assignments that he has been on over the years. One thing that is unique about Joe is that he is a self-proclaimed generalist. Meaning, he'll go into the Amazon and shoot for National Geographic. He'll, come home and shoot swimming for the Olympics and then go out to France just to shoot, portraits. He does it all, and he does it all very well. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about how important it is to be flexible and be able to adapt, especially in today's, fast-changing world of photography needs. We're going to talk about how to master light and how it can help you to not only enhance, but to add influence into your images by giving your subjects depth. We're going to talk about quantity and quality of light, of course, and how to own your mistakes. Joe shares of several mistakes that he's made over his career and how he bounced back to become an even better photographer for them. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into today's interview with Joe McNally. Joe, I know that you went to school for journalism. When did you know that photography was going to play a larger role in your life?
Well, yeah, I went to school to be a writer at the Newhouse School at Syracuse, but it was really, it sounds kind of hackneyed to say love at first sight, but I had to take a photography class. It was required of all writing majors to take one photography class to familiarize yourself with this medium. And as soon as I picked up a camera, I borrowed my dad's old rangefinder camera that he shot the family vacation pictures with. And as soon as I picked up a camera, I was just in love with it. I was like, this is cool. I can do this.
Was it just simply having something in your hand, or was it seeing the photos that you got back?
Both, really. The camera felt very natural in my hands. And anyone who's experienced the magic of the old black and white darkroom and watching that first print or two come up in the developer and start to blossom right in front of your eyes. Yeah, you get bitten by the bug and you can't get unbitten, that's my feeling,
So I know that when it comes to especially shooting with a rangefinder, that's like not particularly easy. No auto modes. The focusing is kind of difficult. When you picked up that rangefinder, what were some of those first challenges that you had technically related to photography that you had?
Oh, with a rangefinder camera, I was foolishly thinking I could shoot sports. Can't shoot sports with a rangefinder. Very difficult. So one of my first critiques from one of the professors in the department, I was a big basketball fan, so I went to one of the Syracuse games, and I thought, well, I'll just concentrate on action around the hoop, and I'll pre-focus on the hoop, wide open. Not a good move.
Not a good move.
Because everything looks sharp in a rangefinder, but when you get the film back, but I thought, it's almost there. So I made a couple of prints, and I brought them to the professor in question. And the very first thing he said to me was, "How are your eyes?"
That's got to build some confidence.
Yeah, so that was a little daunting. Everything was out of focus. So I learned very quickly that rangefinders were strong in certain ways, but certainly not for sports. But it gave me a window, literally. It showed me that I could get out in the world with a camera. And I had a lot of failures, occasional success here and there as a student. And it convinced me, yeah, I need to chase this. I need to go after it.
Mm-hmm. So was your first, obviously you got that rangefinder from your dad, you're shooting with that. But then when you started more of the educational route and learning photography, again, I really want to know, what was it that captivated you so much? Because to make the decision to go to school, to become a writer, like to choose a major in something, that means that it's got to stand out. It's got to be a part of who you are. So then to completely change that, I'm always interested in that. Was it the teachers that you had? Was it the education that you were receiving? What was it that changed your mind?
Yeah, I've always been in love with the written word. I wrote for my high school newspaper, and I thought, I was a wannabe athlete as a youngster. And I thought, well, I'll never be a professional sports guy, but I could maintain a tether to that world if I became a sports writer.
Ah.
Now I wrote for the Daily Orange, which was the daily student newspaper at Syracuse, and I covered sports, and I was very happy to do so. But then when the camera got in the mix, I started thinking, wow, this is a ticket to the world. And also, this will keep me outside. This is not an indoor job. This is not an office job. I'm not going to be tethered to a desk doing this. You have to go places. You have to see things. You have to witness. And that was really powerful for me. The other intersecting force then was my professor, Fred Demarest, who I acknowledge in the book. I was a very, very powerful and patient teacher. And he was my mentor, my teacher, and he also became my dear friend over the years. And he was just he had this very mild-mannered ability to channel the lunatic urges and screaming id of a graduate student who knew nothing but wanted to take on the world with a camera. And he could really patiently channel that energy, and he made your pictures better.
Just through the criticism and the critiques that he would give through his images.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he invited me to become his graduate assistant. After I graduated, I knew I wasn't ready to go into the world as a photographer. And he offered me an opportunity to go with him to London in England and become his graduate assistant. And he would pay me a stipend and give me 9 graduate credits for free, which was a pretty good deal. And in return, what I did was I ran the lab for him. I mixed all the chemistry for all the other students and kept the lab going. And an independent study project was required. I could choose anything I wanted. So with his blessing, I jumped on a train to Lowestoft, which is the eastmost tip of the United Kingdom. And at that point, a thriving fishing port. And I just walked the docks and I talked my way onto a fishing trawler. And I went to sea on a fishing trawler in the North Sea in November. The North Sea is not a mill pond. It is a raging body of water. And I was gone for 14 days, no contact with land, nothing. And I remember just plunging through literally 40, 50-foot waves. We hit force 9 at one point, had to stop fishing. And the wheelhouse, you would dive into the trough of a wave and you'd be in the wheelhouse and look either way, and there'd be nothing on either side of you except a wall of water. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is what I need to do.
Okay. Tell me more about that, because when you tell me that story, I think to myself, no thanks. That sounds horrible. Was it just the experience of seeing the world? Was it the experience of creating a story? What made you think, yep, this is it?
All of the above. Any photographer, I think, will tell you that accompanying at least some measure of the assigning work that you do, there is a sense of adventure. There can be a sense of risk. You have to go where the pictures are. So I went out on the trawler. I've been in coal mines in Siberia. I've climbed buildings. I've been in some dodgy places. You go where the pictures are. That is the deal.
So in that situation, you're trying to tell a story with your images, right? Did you know the scope of what the story would be before you got on that boat, or did you just let it unravel in front of you?
Yeah, there was no plan. I would be lying to you if I told you I had a plan. I just jumped on the boat and I went to sea, and I thought, well, this will be cool. And I didn't even give a thought. Fred, Professor Demarest told me later, he said, after he got off the phone with me, he thought to himself, well, okay, well, he's over 21. He can make his own decision because he kind of felt responsible, like if I got lost at sea or something. And yeah, I made pictures of the crew, the dining and fishing and the 24-hour rhythm of the boat, because the boat never stops, right? You're always fishing. And it was a sidewinder trawler, which means they threw the nets over the side on a kind of a winch type of a thing, and they would haul up after several hours of dragging. They would haul up and then just see what they had gotten. And this is all fascinating to me because that's the thing. Jay Maisel, a very famous photographer, has always said that being a photographer is a license to steal experience. So I'm not a fisherman, but I got to go on that boat because I asked to take pictures. So I always tell young photographers, don't think of the camera as a camera, think of it as a visa. You're able to cross boundaries. You enter worlds you would be prohibited from, but for the sake of carrying a camera.
Mm. Now, that's very different than kind of how you approach an assignment today, right? Where you don't just show up and you just hope for the best and see what happens. I'm sure that there's a little more direction into it. And I know that you spent a number of years shooting assignments for large publications. And I had a question about that because that's a world that's foreign to me. If you go on an assignment, you already know what the story is, correct? Like you already know that obviously a story is going to be, say, about a person, and you know kind of what the idea is. Is that correct?
Yeah, to a degree. Stories come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes it's personality driven. You're sent to photograph a celebrity or someone who is excellent at what they do, a dancer, a writer, a composer, whatever it might be. And the story necessarily revolves around that individual. So there's your North Star, if you will. You're building a story about this person. Other stories are far more diffuse. The things that Geographic tends to tackle, and I did many of these for them, were much larger. I mean, I had a story assigned to me at the National Geographic. The title of the story was The Universe.
How do you do that?
And the gist of the story was we were taking a look at at that point, a lot of the newer huge telescopes that were starting to spring up around the world that were taking a look into deeper and deeper space. And it was a highly technical story and difficult to do. But I've done stories on the limits of the human body. I've done stories on the globalization of culture. These are much more amorphous. And when you work with your editor to identify the goals of the story, that's the rough parameters you can dream up in an office. But then you still have to go out into the field and find it. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of, I won't say guesswork, happenstance might be a better way to put it. Hopefully happy accidents. Hopefully you stumble on something that in the course of your projected path, you see another avenue and say, oh, okay. Like the first time I went to Africa for the National Geographic, I was on a story called The Sense of Sight, and I was documenting trachoma in interior Tanzania. And when I went there, I was slated to spend maybe 7 to 10 days. Well, I immediately recognized that this was a much larger, potentially pictorial aspect of the story. So I just stayed for 3 weeks. And I didn't tell anybody about it because I couldn't. There was no email, there were no computers, no cell phones, no sat phones, no nothing. There was one generator in this tiny village that I was staying at. I was staying in a hotel that was $1 a night. No. So when you make decisions like that as a journalist in the field, you have to trust your instincts and hope that the folks back at the office equally trust those instincts. And when I came home, sure enough, Bill looked at me and he didn't even bat an eye. I was like, yeah, okay, all right. So, but that was also back in the day when Geographic had money to burn. Sure, I don't know if that would be possible now, given the state of magazines.
I want to know when it comes to those types of stories, I guess either one, whether it's personality based or, you have to go photograph large telescopes where you already know what needs to be done. Before you go and photograph the assignment, are you trying to conceptualize one photo in your head that you need, that you have to have, or is it more of a series of photos that you just want to capture and then you show up and try to do that?
Again, I'm not dodging the question, but it is both. Something like telescopes is kind of a connect the dots story.
Okay.
You have to go to Double Keck. You have to go to the VLT in Chile. You have to go to the University of Arizona where they make the giant lenses. All of that stuff. Okay, so these are things that you're checking boxes. I have to go there and I have to make good photographs. And then when you get there, you let the situation kind of dictate to you what might be possible. For
Hmm.
Double Keck in Hawaii, it's on the top of Mauna Kea, which is 13,500 feet. So a few miles away, people are bathing in warm water, and you're up there in a ski parka and leggings, and you're battling 40, 50 mile an hour winds and snowdrifts that are 3 or 4 feet high. And you work 24 hours because you have to light the telescope, and then you have to stay up all night while the telescope makes its run. So it's an extremely difficult physical thing to do. And the parameters of the physicality of the location sometimes dictate to you what is possible and what is not. So there's that element that you have to deal with. Other things are more in the realm of imagination, perhaps. And so you dream up something and then you pre-visualize it and you go get it. In the globalization story, I had to photograph an Asian actor or actress in Hollywood, because at that time, the story was all about how we are sharing each other's cultures at very rapid rates now. And Asian stars were making huge impact in Hollywood movies. So I worked with Michelle Yeoh from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And she was also a Bond girl, and she's an amazing actress. And she was a trained martial artist and a ballet dancer. And so I took her out into the desert and I photographed her kind of in a fashiony way. And my editor said to me, "What? I can't use these. What are you, some sort of idiot? That's nothing. They're nice pictures, but there's nothing to do with the story. I need something that says Hollywood, stunt, and Asian star, And so I called her back up, and her agent immediately said no, but she said yes, thankfully, because she grew up being in Jackie Chan movies, and she's incredibly brave and adept physically. So we both dropped on wires under a helicopter. And we're both dangling below a helicopter, and I floated her over the Hollywood sign. I photographed her up there. So it said immediately, stunt, Asian actress, Hollywood.
Hollywood, yeah.
So you have to, photography is cheap physical oftentimes. You have to put totems physically in the picture that are signposts for the reader. Out in the desert, Bill was right. And it's like, this doesn't say Hollywood. It's pretty, but it doesn't say Hollywood. So I came back with something that said Hollywood.
Quite literally.
Yep.
Hey, Raymond here, and we will get back to today's show in just a moment. Do you want your photos to have more life? Do you want to know exactly what camera settings to use and why? Well, professional photographers all over the world capture beautiful images by shooting in manual mode. Why? Because it unlocks your camera's full potential. But how do you know what settings you should use? Well, I want to break that down for you in my free ebook, Picture Perfect Camera Settings, which you can download over at perfectcamerasettings.com. In the book, I'm going to share different lighting situations that you'll find yourself in, and photos that I've captured with real camera settings, and how to know which settings to change to get the look that you want. So don't wait. Download your free copy over at perfectcamerasettings.com to unlock your camera's full potential. Now, let's get back to today's interview. Do you think that the breakdown was just not preparing enough for the story, not understanding the story enough, or was it a technical understanding from your part? Where do you think that breakdown occurred?
You mean in the first photograph?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I was out of control. That was the main issue. I flew her out to the desert in a helicopter. I mean, we had budget. So I flew her out in a helicopter. And then when we were out there, when the helicopter, we did an impromptu stuff without safety belts. The two of us are hanging on the skids, and the chopper pilot is hovering the chopper at 100 feet over the desert floor. Really dumb. Really dumb. But yeah, I was just determined. I was a bit, let's call it headstrong.
Okay. I like that. I like that. So bring it up there, talking that those photos in the desert were more fashion side. I know that a lot of photographers today are told that they need to niche down, that they need to find, if they want to find success, that they have to shoot the same thing over and over again to become known as that thing. But here you are flying a helicopter over the Hollywood sign. You're shooting with Blue Angels. You're shooting corporate campaigns, the Olympics. You're in a subway car with Tony Bennet. You call yourself a generalist. Do you think that you could come up in today's, or not you specifically, do you think that it's possible to come up in today's photographic world as a generalist? Or do you think that the landscape has changed too much?
I think it's tough. Photography's never been easy, but my path was relatively straightforward. I started as a newspaper photographer. I moved into color, and then I started shooting for magazines, small magazines, and then you try to shoot for bigger magazines, and then you try to shoot cover stories, and then you try to really aim high. And that was the arc of my career for 25 years. But magazines are by and large not, well, so they're certainly not the force they used to be. I mean, a lot of magazines I've shot covers for Time, Newsweek, Life, they're all gone. Time is still sort of around. Sports Illustrated, I had a contract with Sports Illustrated, shot many covers of Sports Illustrated. It's gone. I was on the last team that Sports Illustrated will ever really field at the Rio Olympics. There were 6 of us. In 1984, which was my first Olympics, I was not shooting for Sports Illustrated, but I remember going to dinner with them. I was kind of this junior pup, and they invited me to dinner. I was like, oh, man, these guys really know what they're doing. And I think they had 18 photographers there.
Wow.
So the world has changed, and photographers have to adapt. I certainly have had to adapt, and magazines and editorial work is really not so much on our roster anymore. So if you can make it as a generalist, it's a very tough path. Let's just say that. Even a very notable editor in the newspaper industry actually was interviewed and quoted and said, if you wanted to be a photojournalist nowadays, it would be advisable to have a trust fund.
Oh, ouch.
She actually said that. And there's no real arguing with it because magazine day rates are common knowledge. If you can get them, they haven't kept pace with the expense of being a photographer. So I think photographers have to seek other paths and go into, as you say, niche weddings, family portraits, things that actually are extremely hard to do. I mean, nobody in the business works harder than a wedding photographer. My God, that is hard work. But there really is viable opportunity there. There's wedding photographers who do very, very well because they're very, very good at what they do, and they should do well. But the editorial part of the marketplace is a bit of a shambles. Staffs of newspapers, they're either non-existent or they've shrunk. When I joined the New York Daily News in 1976 as a copy boy, and I was never a staff photographer there, I was a copy boy. And then I graduated to studio apprentice in the photo studio. But I think there were, well, I won't say an exact number, but there were over 50 staff photographers at the New York Daily News.
My goodness. For essentially just a citywide newspaper, right? New York City.
It was New York's picture newspaper. The photo gathering operation was astounding. There are precisely 0 staff photographers there now. So yes, landscape has changed. It's gotten tougher. You have to really choose your battles and pick your goals very carefully.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that being a generalist essentially comes from just you had to, right? When you came up, right? You can't just choose to do one thing because you're sent on assignments to do multiple different things. You don't know what you're going to have to do. You have to shoot a portrait, you have to shoot a product, whatever it is, you got to do these things. I'm interested now, if you had to start over today, right? Brand new, which sounds daunting, I'm sure. What area of photography would you go into?
Good question. I can't help myself but pursue people. I am hugely uninterested in still life, and I'm not a particularly good landscape photographer. And weddings, tough. The best weddings I've ever shot, I've shot for free, for friends. I've had the most fun. When you start to put a price tag on weddings, then the responsibilities really seriously grow. So I'd probably pursue trying to do some sort of portraiture, start locally at first, and then try to graduate, try to push into showing work that would get me interested or bring me to the attention of people who were perhaps managing celebrities and or commercial types of advertising work that involved portraiture.
So you would still work, or you would work in the advertising space rather than just photographer to client?
Yeah, I would certainly angle that direction. I mean, we're up for an ad right now. It's a huge job and it involves portraiture and it's a little quirky. But if there is work like that out there, that would be the direction I would head.
Gotcha. Now, being in business as a photographer, as long as you have, I'm sure that you've made a number of mistakes in your life, or in your business rather.
Never.
And
Never.
not one.
Flawless.
Well, in your book, The Real Deal, you share of a story of you photographing Phil Sokoloff. And it fascinated me because it's kind of a story of a client loving their photos. So where does it go wrong from the business side?
Well, I had gone out for Time magazine and I had to linger. There was, I think, weather problems and we had to make the set. And I came back with the pictures and they loved the pictures, but they just didn't want to pay for the extra time and travail that occurred. And I got pretty angry about that. Like, why? That was when magazines really started to push back at photographers. And I'm sure every photographer for any magazine has heard like, oh, do you think you could go scout it? And you could scout it for free, right? Like total disregard for the freelancer's time. And so I got ornery, which is never a good idea. You have to keep emotions apart from your business life. And I did good photographs, but I did poorly in the aftermath because I just got curmudgeonly about it and I refused to release the pictures. And everybody wanted them, and I said no. And that was just plain dumb and immature and selfish. I think that's why I titled that chapter, When Hubris Meets Stupid. I did well photographically. Everything else I failed at.
Now, I want to know, though, where does the selfish aspect come in? Because the issue was that the time wasn't willing to pay you for the additional time. So what's the selfish aspect?
Well, also, we got along okay, but he was kind of difficult, and I was just feeling mistreated across the board. So I refused to sell him the photographs. And he had friends, one of whom happened to be one of the editors at Time Life in the system there. And they asked me if I could give him the pictures, and I kept saying no. I should have just said, fine. I do say this in that chapter, the house always wins. When you tilt at the windmill, you're going to get knocked off your horse.
Okay, so then tell me, because I know that oftentimes new photographers especially are feeling that pushback in this world of what they call, quote unquote, very saturated markets of photographers. The pressure to shoot for free or extremely cheap is stronger than ever, and it makes a lot of photographers feel very useless. So at what point does it make sense? Because it was your time that you shot for. Is the answer, you said that you should have just given him the photos. But at what point does it not become about that and you should really hold your ground? Does that question make sense?
Sure. I mean, there are certain, Lynn, who is my studio manager, has been with me for 30 years. She knows the business backwards and forwards. And she's also a marvelous producer. So she's gotten me everything from an elephant in the desert to a 5-ton crane on Fifth Avenue. So she is the face of the business. It's best that she answer these emails because I might say something really rash. She's always cordial. And the way we liken ourselves to is that we're like a rubber band. We'll stretch, but we won't break. There's a certain point we won't go beyond. And I had a situation once with, I won't go into the specifics of it, but I was willing to bend because I really wanted the job. And they just held their line and said, no, this is the most money we have. And I walked away. And as I said afterwards, I was like, I understood, because it was just a mom and pop shop called the NFL.
Small little business.
Yeah. And so I was willing to backpedal like crazy because I really wanted to do the job, because the individual in question, the portrait subject, was fascinating to me. And they just wouldn't get off the dime, literally. Mm-hmm. And we walked away.
Does that happen quite often where, I mean, you get really emotional about wanting a job and then just not not choosing it, or do you get the job more often than not?
Well, the jobs I really gravitate towards or get at this point really are oftentimes my own proposals. I art direct a lot of things myself. I write proposals. I do a fair amount of work for Nikon cameras. And when they need ideas, they might ring me up, not always, but sometimes. And I teach a fair amount. So off of that teaching, I try to create scenarios that I enjoy, that I can teach within. So there's a lot of variety to it, really, in terms of the way I get work now, though the two big jobs that we are facing off with came in across the transom. So you just don't know. You really don't know where the work is going to come from. And the jobs I occasionally get asked to do, most of them I just walk away from. And I used to kind of shake my head. Now I just don't really have any emotions about it at all, other than to wonder why ascending to the position of an art director or photo editor at a magazine precludes one from being able to add. It's like, can you add this together? Like, you're offering $500 for the entire job. Here's the thing, my assistant makes $450 a day when we go into the field. So kind of do the math there. Some things come across and they're just so ludicrous as to be painfully laughable.
Do you think that that's just poor expectations on their part? Or do you think that, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that, do you think that photographers will ever be able to create the caliber of work that, say, you were able to create coming up, to have the time, to have the access, to have the budget? Or was that just a poor mistake on that in particular company?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of photographers now who are doing great work, and they're finding work, and they're being funded, and a lot of it is commercially driven. I think photographers who are being successful in more of the editorial realm have turned the trick of using social media to their advantage, and they've created essentially their own ecosystem. And you particularly see that in the natural history realm, conservation and ecology, where photographers are essentially creating their own foundations, if you will, and soliciting donations across the board from potentially unlikely sources or varied sources. The first jobs I did, series of jobs for many years at Geographic, all had budgets north of $250,000. It's hard to get $250,000 from anybody right now to go do a major job. So you have to be adept at fundraising, grant writing, soliciting funds from corporations, all of whom then have expectations, that you go into the field with. So there is that element where photographers are being very energetic in setting up a system by which they can, quote unquote, self-fund their own work. And then there's the commercial world, which is still very viable. And a lot of activity occurs there, and that is well funded. The tough thing is the aspect of just being a lone assignment photographer, pursuing a journalistic type of a story or endeavor. That's a tough road right now.
Can you give me some sort of context to that $250,000? Like, what would a big job pay today? Or what would the budget for a good sized job be today?
At National Geographic?
Sure.
I mean, it varies, right? Every institution has its own budgetary guidelines.
Sure.
So the first cover story I did for National Geographic, my contract was for 26 weeks of work, 7-day weeks. It was implicit in the contract that occasionally you would take a day off.
Okay.
It was 7 days a week, $500 a day for 26 weeks. So you can do the math from there.
Gotcha.
And you can make a living, because then at that point in time, the National Geographic only had the National Geographic, the United States English edition National Geographic. So if you had a well-received story in Geographic as a photographer, you could then turn it over to your agent in the aftermath, after the embargo was over. And then they could market that story to magazines in Europe, say, or Japan or Australia. And there would actually be competitions. So you'd have very viable magazines, like in France, you had Figaro and Paris Match. In Germany, you had Bunte and Stern and Epoca in Spain. And then the London magazine scene was very viable. So they'd actually compete. And then you and your agent would split that money afterwards. And you could, in the aftermath of a Geographic story, you could make an additional 75, 100, 150K.
Wow.
And that would be a living. that could translate into a living. So it wasn't jet set living, but you could work,
Yeah.
and continue to work. That's all gone because the geographic took the English language edition and it exploded. Now I think, I don't know, don't quote me on this really, but there's 20, 25, maybe more international editions of the National Geographic, which automatically breaks the exclusive. That means your story is running in those countries.
Sure. Oh, wow. Wow.
That went away. That source of revenue, the aftermath, the stock potential of your story over time disappeared.
That makes sense. It's unfortunate, but it makes sense. I know that you are very well known for your use of light. I think you and just having copious amounts of lighting gear are very synonymous with each other. In a world of YouTube videos suggesting to just shoot in open shade, or the dynamic range of today's cameras so good you can just lift the shadows in post, do you think that your use of light and your desire, or maybe not desire, but just always bringing lots of lighting gear with you, is that just a carryover from the old school film days, or is there more to it than that?
Are you about to ask me if I'm a dinosaur?
Not at all. And I apologize if it comes out that way.
So, no, the availability of technology in cameras today is astonishing. As you say, the dynamic range, the upper reaches of high ISO reach numbers that we never dreamed of. But high ISO has everything to do with quantity of light, how much light there is. It has nothing to do with quality of light. If you want to influence a situation, if you want to speak with light, if you want to characterize your subject, if you want to tell the story of your subject, then bringing lighting along with you and being competent with it is absolutely part of the game. I always say, if you're on location and you don't have a light with you, that can work out just fine. Could be beautiful natural light. That's wonderful. When those days happen, I'm like, thank you, God. But at the same time, if you're pushed to the wall, the light's not good, then you can't counter that. You become a victim of circumstances. Even with one flash in your hand, you can turn the situation around and express yourself, articulate yourself, and literally subdue the location, even with one flash. So lighting is part of the game. I mean, the photography comes from the Greek word photographos, which means to write with light.
I always love talking about light because light is something that it's so interesting because technically it's everywhere. But being able to train your eye to be able to see light, I think in the sense that you have, it takes work, it takes time. But I think I always hear from new photographers, how do we see light? How do we train ourselves to see light? Do you have any exercises or any recommendations that you have for photographers who are looking to get into photography to better see light?
I mean, the obvious one is experiment, shoot lots and lots of pictures, see what you like, see what you don't like. But the other thing that, again, was available to me and is still available now, though there's a lot of retouching going on, is I look at lots of photographs. When I would get onto airplanes back in the day when I was trying to learn light, and I never assisted anybody, I learned on my own. I wouldn't have like Time and Newsweek. I'd buy Vogue or Cosmo or Harper's Bazaar, and I'd look at the way those photographers, the fashion photographers, were using light. And those photographers really knew what they were doing. And you could tell, because there wasn't that much retouching going on, if you looked at the catch lights in the eyes, you could tell if someone was using an umbrella, softbox, where it was placed. Was it low light? Was it high light? Where are the catch lights coming from? Where's the brilliance? Where, all of that stuff. And I could piece out the various components that I was seeing and experiment myself. And you learn through many mistakes. I mean, I was thrown into the breach. My first staff job, I wrote about it in the book, was for ABC television. And it was a great job in the sense that I had to shoot color and black and white on every single assignment. So that meant I was juggling different, what was then called ASA, now called ISOs in my head. And on Monday night, I'd go shoot ABC Monday Night Football. Then I'd bomb down to Washington to shoot Ted Koppel on a set. And then I'd come back to New York and I'd shoot a still life of an Emmy in the studio. And then I'd go to Susan Lucci and photograph her on all my children. And it's all color and black and white. And oftentimes I was in situations I had to light something. So I learned. I had to learn. I wanted to work, so I had to learn.
How much of that learning do you think can happen in the real world versus taking your own time and learning lighting yourself before a job?
I think the bulk of it can actually happen in the real world. You'll take your lumps, but yes, I mean, I always counsel young photographers, take the job. You'll figure it out. Even if the job terrifies you, tell the client, yeah, no, I can handle it. Unless, of course, it's obviously just way overmatched. I've had photographers write to me and say, I've got to shoot a group photo of our church chorus, and it's 30 people and I have one flash. And I'm like, the best thing you can do is give that job back.
Yeah.
You know, because you're just not ready for it. You can't do that. So there is a boundary there. But if you reasonably have your pins under you and you are determined, most of the time I would suggest say yes to the job, even if you think it's over your head.
That's perfect. One thing that we talk about on this podcast a lot is that a great photo it's more than the sum of its settings, that there's a lot that goes into it. You talked earlier about happy accidents. Have you ever had an assignment where, maybe the shot that was used or the shot that you loved the most didn't work out technically, but the moment of the reaction just made it a showstopper?
Sure. I mean, some things just don't work out. I mean, I made beautiful pictures of Fiona Apple. She wanted to be a warrior woman. And so she asked me to get her a suit of armor. I said, all right, and we did a thing in the Puck building in New York as a daylight studio. And I went to town on this. She was in the armor. We had fake blood dripping on the sword. I took 2 or 3 dozen roses and I had my assistants pull the petals off of them, and they're on ladders on either side of her, and they're dropping rose petals on her. We went full-blown Camelot on this. And at the end of the day, her agent looked at me and said, we have to get back to the bus. The only way, we're late. We have a commitment in New Jersey. The only way we'll do that is jump on the subway. And I looked to Fiona and I said, get on the subway in the armor? And she was like, sure. And so we got her on the subway with the sword and the armor and everything. And I shot like mad through like 10 subway stops in New York City at rush hour with flash on camera bouncing it off the ceiling of the subway. And that was the picture that ran. Wow. Studio session went away. Yeah, so things can take unexpected turns. And the measure of a photographer is that you're adept enough to pivot with them.
Why do you think it was the photo in the subway? Like, was it just that the subway added an interesting element to the photo, or was it Fiona's reaction? Was it everybody else's reaction? What was it? What made that the shot?
It was because it was just plain simple weird. Yeah. You have this incredibly petite woman dressed in armor with a sword at rush hour.
You don't see that every day. Yeah.
You can't, as they say, you can't make this stuff up.
Of course. Joe, I know that we're coming to the end of our time here, so I got one last question for you. I know that over the years, you've been on a lot of assignments. You've been in a lot of dangerous situations. Actually, let's take that situation earlier where you went out on the fishing boat, right? It's a very dangerous situation. I listened to your interview with Chase Jarvis, and in it, you said that it's very important to keep yourself in check and to tell yourself, nobody really cares, that these are just photos. For you personally, like, what is it about the photo that makes the juice worth the squeeze?
I never heard that before.
Oh, really?
Because it's your job. It's your mission. And I don't take myself particularly seriously, but I take the work of being a photographer very seriously. It's an important component of who we are. And thank goodness there are photographers out there who are chasing this stuff. I mean, right now there's photographers on the Russian-Ukrainian border putting themselves at serious risk to let us know what's going on there. It becomes part of your heart and soul.
Joe, I don't know how to end it, I think, any better than that. It really is one of those things to where I feel like it's hard oftentimes for people who are non-photographers, I think, to grasp the power of a photograph. And I think that when talking to other photographers, it can be almost implied. But being able to hear it from somebody as accomplished as you, that it's got to be in your DNA. You have to really want this. It's powerful. And obviously it comes from a place of truth. So thank you very much. Before I let you go, Joe, I know that you have a new book coming out. I know that listeners are going to be interested in finding out more about you, obviously, online. So can you share where listeners can see more of your work and find your new book?
Sure. First off, the new book is called The Real Deal, Field Notes from the Life of a Working Photographer. And there's a lot of information there, presented anecdotally. And it's at your friendly neighborhood Amazon and hopefully Barnes & Noble and other places. It's published by Rocky Nook, and they are offering it as well on their website. And as far as my presence online, Joe McNally Photo is my handle on Instagram, and same thing for Twitter. I'm out and about, so I'm fairly easy to find. My website is joemcnally.com, and then we write a blog off of that, joemcnally.com/blog.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Start a conversation. Grow together. That is it for this week. Remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.